in here. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see your smiling faces here today. I'm Sonia Ross, in case you haven't figured that part out. And I am thrilled to be here with my dear, dear sister, Michelle Hord, who has an amazing story to share, and actually a wonderful guide for triumph and victory over dark places and spaces and time. So we're going to have a little chit chat. And I will say that we welcome questions at the end. And I'm very nice, but I like to wrap my hammer in velvet. So if for any reason we get questions that appear to turn into statements, don't feel embarrassed when I cut you off.
The Oscar music will start to play, right?
That's right. I don't have the Apollo hook to pull anybody off stage, but I will do my best interpretation of that. So Michelle, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you all for coming out.
I am glad to have you here. So let's just get right on into this book. How many of you have read the book? Read Michelle's book? It's okay if you haven't. How many of you are eager to read Michelle's book? So that would be everybody. Okay. I love the title, The Other Side of Yet. And I want you to elaborate a bit about why that title and how you were able to divide your journey into these categories of before, yet, and after.
Yes, so the title comes from, I'm a granddaughter of a Baptist preacher, and so I grew up in the Baptist church. And the title comes from the verse in Job, though he slay me, yet do I trust him. And the book, as Sonia mentioned, is divided into before, yet, and after. I started my career right here in D.C. at America's Most Wanted, doing missing children stories. And I would go across the country and sit in living rooms and wonder how these folks were putting words together. You know, the worst possible thing you can imagine is losing a child, especially losing a child to violence. And so I would sit in these rooms, I would talk to these mothers, and I know we'll speak a bit more in depth about my personal story, but decades later, I found myself on the other side of that police tape when I lost my own 7-year-old daughter to violence. And one of the visceral things that happened immediately, literally before we left the crime scene, was that verse in Job popped in my head, and I Googled it because I wanted to make sure I had it right. Though he slay me, yet do I trust him. And so the book is about how do we get to the other side of yet. We can talk about COVID on a global scale. We can talk about illness, changes in our families, changes in our lives. We all have these definitive moments that are befores. And then all of a sudden, life does not look like we thought it was going to look. And at that moment, we have a chance, whether it's to your God, to the universe, to your gut, to say, yet, this may not be what I imagined for my life yet. And so that's where the title from the book comes from, that journey.
So let's talk about this moment of intersection between before and yet, when you're really fully in the moment dealing with this unimaginable loss of your sweet Gabrielle. And if you would like to introduce us to a friend who carried you in that moment, Barbara. Explain to the audience here who Barbara is.
Yes, so my Gabrielle was my only child. I had her at 39. I had been told for most of my life that I probably wasn't going to be able to have a child, and was blessed to have this beautiful little girl, this effervescent little girl who was full of energy and life. And her partner in crime, her whole life, was a doll named Barbara, a rag doll. Now, I'm old enough to remember when there weren't dolls that looked like me. And so from the time Gabrielle remembered life, Barbara was with her, a little brown rag doll, who I still carry with me. And, you know, I had to tell you the backup before I started reaching in my purse, and y'all thought I was crazy. but Sonia asked me to bring Barbara. I will warn you, there are no children here, but Barbara's a nudist. It was not my doing, it was my child's doing, I think just to upset me at the time because I seemed to react to the nudity. One of the things I can tell you that I think is so important in any journey, whether it's a grief journey of any type, is levity. And when we're in pain, we think that darkness and pain is absolute. And it can be, and yet finding little moments of joy, little moments to be yourself, little moments and things to laugh about. Sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to do that because we feel like I'm not supposed to enjoy this meal. I'm not supposed to have a gut laugh. And so Barbara, in addition to becoming my security blanket in a lot of ways, the way she was for Gabrielle, has also been a reminder of that sweet levity that God gives us as well.
Sweet levity, that's really a good way of putting it. In the book, you describe another moment of sweet levity that is actually part of your before, and that's the conversation that you had with your grandmother after you had lost your mother. Your grandmother's words were very wise. Would you mind sharing that with everyone? And when did that moment come back to you in the current journey that you're on?
Yes, so I lost my mother when I was 24. My mother was 50. She had a cerebral aneurysm. And at the time, her mother was dying of cancer that had just spread to her brain. And she was too sick to go to my mother's funeral. And I sat next to her on the edge of her bed, and she said, in old school black woman, Midwest, no nonsense, she said, well, kids, you have two choices. You can either keep going or you can lay down and die. And I guess in a way that could sound harsh, but the reality is that's the choice we all make every day, right? Every day we can choose to keep going in spite of. We can look for the yet, we can look for the positive, we can look for the opportunity, or we can give up. And I have held on to that all these years, and certainly when I lost Gabrielle, that rang for me as well.
Now, when you first heard her say that to you, that, you've got these choices, it's almost like a cold bucket of water, like,
yes.
You can either do this or do that, and...
If I'd have said what I wanted to, she would have done this and that, so
Exactly. So, coming forward with that moment, was it different? Was the feeling different? And how did that help you?
It's ironic. I hope this doesn't sound like a diversion. Shortly before I lost my daughter, which was obviously sudden, I had just finished reading The Underground Railroad, and the main character's name was Cora, and that was my mother's name. And I don't think the timing of me reading that was by accident, because it was such a reminder to me of what generations and generations and generations of my people had survived, and the resilience and I use this term in my book, the defiant faith. Not because it seems that it could be so, but in spite of what appears, to keep going and to keep pushing. And I think that was my grandmother's challenge, and that is the challenge as I looked in the mirror that day, as I looked in the mirror the day I went to speak at Gabrielle's service, that I have chosen to hold, is to reach back to where I come from and to hold on to that defiant faith that says, even if I don't see the light, I know if I keep walking, I'll get there.
So now, what made you feel the universality of this type of grief, or this type of transition, I guess you should say, a life transition of where you were before, knowing your journey changes in the yet? Where did it, at what point in that did you say, I've got to share this with the world to help people understand a path forward now that I have found a path forward? Where in that process did that kick in for you?
It wasn't an exact moment. As a journalist, you're always writing. Writing is therapy, writing about the world, about your world. And so I journaled just from the day after this happened. The few hours of sleep I would have, I would get up and just start writing.
Few hours of sleep.
not necessarily consistently, but a few hours of sleep, I would get up and I would start writing every day. I would read devotionals and I would start writing. I felt like I had to develop, I was in a war, and that I was going to have to develop rituals and practices to survive. And so immediately I started to do that. And I was blessed to find a trauma therapist who has continued to be just a wonderful partner on this journey. And I would occasionally share some of those journal entries with her, and she encouraged me to share them with close family and friends who wanted to be helpful. And I started to have people say, do you mind if I share this with someone else? Or, you know, I hadn't been to church in months, and then I read what you wrote, and it was just so powerful. And so while I've always wanted to write a book, this is not a book anyone would ever want to write. And I realized that it was not about me. It wasn't even about my specific journey, but that there was something that God was doing through the holes in my heart that was giving hope and faith to other people. And so this in some ways is a love letter to the memory of my beautiful little girl. Beyond that, my hope is it is also a testimony that other people going through all sorts of difficulties can use as a step-by-step guide and map.
Now, one of the earliest emotions, and I'm sure everyone here can relate to this, one of the earliest emotions you connected in your yet was hope. Why hope? Because it's followed very closely by resilience, right? So you would think, well, the logical mind would say, I'm relying on resilience right now to get me to hope. But your hope came before the resilience. So why hope as one of the first emotions that you held on to in your journey?
Because that verse, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I was really clear of the though he slay me. The yet will I trust him was the beginning of hope. It was a battle cry. It was aspirational at first. It probably had a question mark at the end of it, quite frankly. But I think the hope was, I can't imagine why this would happen. I later had to understand there are some things in life that do not have explanation. But I'm still here for some reason. Though I may not even want to be without my child, I am still here. And so I think the hope was born from the reality that even though the ship wrecked, somehow I survived. And so there must be something else that I'm supposed to do. And so I think that's where the hope and faith connected.
It's interesting that you mentioned the shipwreck almost immediately here. Can you share some detail about the revelation you got through reading in the Bible about the shipwreck and how other people may be in the midst of shipwreck reaching out to give hope to you? And then there you were in your shipwreck. So can you elaborate a bit on that part?
Yes, there's throughout the book, there are different times when I will bring up Bible verses, Bible stories. One of them is the story of Paul being a prisoner, being on a boat. This is my first grade non-divinity school version of it, so excuse the brevity. But the bottom line is he's being held a prisoner. He says, we probably shouldn't go this way. They go that way anyway. God says, listen, this ship is going to crash. Take care of yourselves and your men, eat. The ship will crash, nevertheless you will survive. Again, admittedly, if there are any divinity students, please forgive me. But what I take away from that is there are times in life where, whether we see it coming or we don't see it coming, the shipwrecks. And there we are in the middle of all of this. And what do we need to do? We need to do what Mama would say, take care of ourselves, have something to eat, get some rest, brace for impact if you have that warning. We don't always. But the fact that you are still here, that you will survive, that promise of survival, I think is the beginning of how you start to lay the path to hope and to a yet and maybe even to an after.
Now, one thing I do love about your book is the way it is divided into categories, and the chapters have these wonderful titles that are instructional. Was that on purpose? I mean, keep getting up, accept what was lost, trust the process, and think the titles of each chapter are instructional. So was that by design?
It was. When you spend years in morning television, you're expected to explain the world to someone in 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
The
Absolutely.
news you can use. No, you know what? My hope was that even if someone opened up to the table of contents and read the table of contents, even the table of contents, make room for joy, lean into change, control what you can, face the dark, that those kind of action commands could hopefully be instructive and inspirational. So the chapters are named in that way.
And do they overlap? Say, for example, some instruction in a chapter that's actually part of the before can be instructive in yet, or can be instructive in after, and vice versa. Are they interchangeable for you, or were they interchangeable for you?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I've taken away from this particular grief journey is that it is a journey. It does not end. It is not linear. I think we're taught that there are stages of grief, and we think if we keep checking off the boxes, it's over and it's done. And obviously, there are different types of losses, right? There are different types of losses in our lives. There are some that are painful, and we anticipate perhaps, like parents or grandparents. There are losses of health, losses of marriage and love. So there is not, in my experience, a linear process of I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. What happens, and I wish I could name the person that came up with this illustration, because I think it's so powerful, the idea of there being 3 jars and this black ball that represents grief. And in the first jar, it takes up the entire jar. And then over time, while the ball does not get smaller, the jar gets bigger. And what I do believe in our journeys is that somehow our hearts and our spirits find ways to make space for the loss. The loss does not get smaller. And so, to your point about chapters, there are still days, there are still hours, there are still things that can trigger and make me feel like I have gone back in time. And what my therapist has reminded me, what I have to remind myself is, this isn't forever. You haven't lost ground. Today is a bad day. Tomorrow will be a different day. And I think that's really, really important.
Before I go to this next question, because what you just said is very revelatory, there are people who may feel, well, what I'm dealing with or have dealt with is not of the magnitude of what you've dealt with. So how can I possibly think this deeply and seriously about my journey that's not as profound as yours? What I'm going through is not as profound. Are the processes the same?
I, do not believe there is a grief index. I think in general terms, people, when you talk about losing a child, when you talk about certain losses, certain ways we lose people, certainly, generally, we may think that is worse than. I think that's dangerous, though, because we all walk our walks. And to say that I experienced COVID and it was traumatic for me, even if I did not personally lose someone, that COVID wasn't traumatic for me. COVID was traumatic for me in my own way. So my point is, it is not anyone's responsibility to name anyone else's journey. And loss is loss. Of course they're different. Of course there are different scales of loss. But I don't think we minimize moments of pain in our journey, moments of loss in our journey. And I think that the things that I talk about, my hope was that I actually wrote this in the middle of COVID, because it felt like all of the sudden there was this universal experience where I went through something which fortunately, statistically, most people do not experience. There was this universal experience of the world all of a sudden looks different than it did yesterday. So what could happen tomorrow, right? We all experience that, and we're all, frankly, still in this trauma, post-trauma, coming to terms, seeing how it's playing out in our communities, in our jobs, in our economy, with our children. So I don't think there's a scale to pain. Pain is pain. And in the moment, you honor where you are, and hopefully there are tools that you can use to build those resilience muscles regardless of where you are in that journey.
Wow, that's something to sit with, isn't it? Isn't it? Now, the first chapter of the yet section of the book says, dare to turn the page. When did you decide the before was done and you were ready to turn the page, or that you realized the before is done, I am now in yet? When did you dare to turn that page?
I think every day that I got up and kept trying, I was turning the page. I think in a book, we try to create story arc, for lack of a better term, right? In life, there were little signs. There were things like, in the very earliest days, my daughter was killed 2 months before her 8th birthday. And on her 8th birthday, I was determined to get up and leave the house and go give my first donation of what became a foundation to a local Girl Scout house. And that was a beginning of a yet. I didn't know it then, but just saying, even in this dark space, I'm going to keep going and I'm going to choose to honor her in this way. And then over time, there were natural things, going through the court system, dealing with the judicial process, which took years. There were natural inflection points where things changed, where I had more brain space, where I had more heart space to think about things differently. But it is one of those things where you look back and you see the road, but while you're on it, you don't realize how far you've gone.
So that page was turning for a long time before you even knew it was
yes.
turning. So once you realized that page had turned and you're now in your yet, meaning I'm still a work in progress is what I take yet to mean. How far into that journey in yet did you begin to see that there is an after, or that you could catch that light at the end of the tunnel where you're now approaching after? How long in that process were you in that process?
I think we're always in that process. Yet is really a pivot. Yet for me was, this has happened, I can't change it. I am somehow surviving it. I'm hopefully developing tools that will help me continue to survive it. I'm facing it. And the yet is, I'm still here, and so I want to figure out why I'm still here and what life could look like, since it's not going to look like I thought it was going to look like. And so after, which is the third part of the book, actually has a question mark, because I think life is a series of before, yets, and afters, right? I think as long as we're here, there are new intersections, there are new surprises, there are new yets, both wonderful and amazing and heart-wrenching. But we're always in that process of becoming and pivoting as long as we're here.
Have you ever ricocheted back where you're in after and you realize, oh, this is the after now. My life is different now. Have you ever ricocheted back? And how far back did you ricochet? Like, did you go back to the beginning of yet? A few steps back? Were you ever in before and had to go leapfrog forward to after?
I think all grief journeys are like the ocean. There's high tide, there's low tide, there's times when you're surprised you can walk out that far. There's times you get knocked on your ass because you're arrogant enough to think that you can make it out. So I think part of an after is just coming to terms with this is my life experience now. And I don't mean that to sound dire, because there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of love. I've remarried. I'm in a wonderful, loving relationship. relocated back to the DC area where my beloved HU and lots of friends are. So
Okay,
there are,
HU.
I had to get it out at some point. I had to get it out. It took me, 15, 20 minutes?
There's something they're supposed to say. I know, HU. Okay, got that in there. Go
I was
ahead.
trying to be gracious about it. But I say that to say, there have been new, wonderful parts of life that I've reached out for. And there are, of course, whether it's holidays, whether it's sometimes seeing a little child that reminds me of my daughter, or frankly, watching her friends who are now turning 14 and 15 and going into high school. And so realizing that life, the exercise of life is different than I would have imagined. And there will always be those moments that feel like a sucker punch that maybe take me back. But what I've learned is how to manage through those moments and to know that they will not last forever.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Now, so often we are encouraged to think of transformation as a before-after concept. So the fact that there's even this extended period of yet, I don't think I have ever heard anyone describe a life transformation process that included this yet zone. Is it messy? Can it be bittersweet? Is it neat? Is it happy sometimes? Can you put a description to yet?
I think it's all of the above, right? I think whether you look personally or professionally, whether you forecast change or change happens to you, the process of changing and becoming is an active one. And so, while it started with that verse of, though he slay me, yet do I trust him. And if you just look at the construction of that sentence, something happened, but I'm willing to pivot and keep going, right? If you take the biblical application out, that's life. That, in fact, is what life is. Something happens, whether it's wondrous, whether it's heart-wrenching, and I have a choice to keep going, to get stuck, to be defeated, to be victorious. And that, to me, is the cycle of life over and over.
So it all goes back to that scripture. And one of the key pieces of advice that you give people is seek inspiration. How important and central to this process has faith been for you? Is it what you were raised to do, where you're taught, I go to the hill from whence cometh my help? Or for people who don't have a spiritual basis, where can they find that type of inspiration?
I think inspiration and impact for me have been tied close. So faith for me has been like an insurance policy. I found out when I was 24 that the Bible verses I was made to learn and the pageants and the songs that actually for me, they carried me through. Having said that, I have found in the last several years of this grief journey, being in nature, looking for signs in nature, meditation, quiet, being present in the moment with someone you love, a dear friend. So I think there are so many ways that we can find inspiration to keep going. And the other side of that I mentioned is impact. So when I spoke about going to give a donation in Gabrielle's honor on what would have been her 8th birthday, I think one of the most powerful tools we have in our toolbox that we don't often use when we're in pain is thinking about somebody other than ourselves. And if you can get outside of yourself, one, it gives you perspective. 2, it allows you to see and demonstrate gratitude. Was he flipping me off in the back? What was going on behind me here? Something crazy was going on, right? You were trying to be so sophisticated and regal about it, and I wanted to turn around, but
We have co-stars.
Listen, I love an ensemble cast.
You gotta let it do what it do, right?
Love. Barbara may be pissed that somebody got a little more airtime, but I'll deal with that later. But you know, seriously, the ability to make an impact, to help others, to get outside of ourselves, which is perhaps counterintuitive when you're down, when you feel sorry for yourself, when you're in pain. And somehow, for me, it has been oxygen, helping other children who look like my baby, getting outside of my pain and having the gratitude of, thank God I had this child for 7 and almost 8 years, that I had my child. So, you know, I think inspiration, both from a nature standpoint, universe standpoint, if religion or spirituality is in your toolkit and that works for you, that's great. But I think the ability to get outside of ourselves and think about how we can make an impact is one of the most powerful tools we have in recovery.
And that was the beginning of Gabrielle's Wings?
Yes.
Okay, now, there was a crucial moment where you talk about a kitchen, a Girl Scout effort and a kitchen that Gabrielle loved to be in. Where in the process were you at the time of the kitchen? Is that right at the cusp of yet and after, or coming out of before, going into yet? Where were you
this was
emotionally?
literally 60 days after her murder that I made this first contribution. So it was survival mode. It was survival mode. And for me, knowing that dates are important to me, knowing that a day like her birthday, which had been such an important day, and the TV and producer in me, you know, I was like, I'm a working mom, but we're going to have the best damn birthday parties. And all the other mommies that stay at home are going to be jealous of our birthday parties. So her birthday was always a wonderful celebration. I knew that that day would just rip my heart out. So I planned. I proactively planned and said, what can I do on that day to celebrate her instead of just wallowing in this horrific grief? And so, you know, again, sometimes we're laying the groundwork and we don't even know it. So probably without me realizing it, that was the beginning of healing. That was the beginning of me deciding, yet I'm going to stay here on this planet and I'm going to try to make a difference.
Now that is awesome, because I have to tell you, I was looking around, Googling around, and watching interviews that you had done with the beginning and the launch of Gabrielle's Wings, thinking, oh my gosh, she's so together with this. I would be at home in pieces. And there you were doing this solid, amazing work. Were you in pieces?
Of course, I'm in pieces right now.
Oh.
You know, I think
Am
that's
I
really
pulling you
important.
apart? I don't
We
want
all
to.
have, listen, we all have different gifts. I'm a communicator by profession. And because of that, sometimes I have literally, whether it was a district attorney or people that I've spoken to, said, I'm sorry, I have to remind you this was my child. Because the impression can be that I'm speaking about it in such a way that I can't possibly have emotion attached. I'm sweating through this cute little dress right now. This is hard. This is hard. This is how I show up in the world, and it has nothing to do with what is going on the inside. So, you know, I think there's a lesson in how we see and perceive people and making assumptions about where they are based on how they look. And we all know, we've all been in our own hells and then buckled up and walked out the door enough to know you never know what I'm going through based on how I show up, right? So, yes, it felt impossible, and yet, through dear friends, through family, through faith, and my father has often said he's grateful for my faith and my fight. What happened to my daughter happened at the hands of her father during a messy divorce in a home where there had been no domestic violence, in a neighborhood where we would whisper and say, this doesn't happen. And so the last thing I was going to do was give evil the opportunity to see me crumble. And so that more than anything has propped me up from day one. I said, I will be damned. I am not Job. I'm not comparing myself to Job. But what happened to me was worse than my worst nightmares. So it felt like something's trying to take me out, and I will be damned if I let it take me out. And so if that means I have to stand up and hold my back straight and look at the camera and speak about my baby, that's what I'm going to do, because that's what she deserves. She deserves, and all of our babies deserve, to be celebrated for who they are and not necessarily what happened to them if they are children who were impacted by violence.
That is awesome. I commend you for being able to get through that and sit here now, as hard as this is, with these probing questions and more questions to come. Are you okay?
Yes.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
We want to make sure. How are we doing on time? Are we ready for questions from the audience? Those of you who have questions, just raise a hand and the mic will come to you. While we wait for that, I want to talk about what you just said on this whole notion of pillar of strength thing, which is core. As Black women in this society, we are often considered pillars of strength and holding up the world and saving the world and nurturing everyone. How much did you struggle with having to balance that whole Black superwoman, Black girl magic thing?
You know, because I lost my mother at 50 to a cerebral aneurysm, and if you look at the disproportionate number of Black women who die younger, my mother was a superwoman. My mother was a pillar of strength. And so in this grief journey, I have done and will continue to do whatever the hell it takes for me to get to the next day, not for anybody else's benefit, not to be strong for anyone else, because that's what can do us in. And so I have, again, dear friends, I have family, I have my writing, I have ways that I express and get it out of my body. And so if I choose to show up a certain way in a certain room, that is one thing, but that is not how I show up in my world, if that makes sense. I think that's really important, to have those safe spaces where you can show up the way you need to show up.
As the church would say, amen. Absolutely. Any questions?
I'll ask one just as folks are still thinking about questions of their own. On the other side, talk to us about the work that you're doing in keeping Gabrielle's memory moving forward, and also in terms of, especially for other communities who are facing trauma in their own.
Yes, thank you for that. So as a mother, my dream, obviously, as most mothers' dreams, is to do the most that I could for my child. And my child was going to be a child of relative privilege compared to most Black and brown girls that look like her. She was going to have the ability to be involved with certain types of activities, have certain exposure, go to certain schools. And so Gabrielle's Wings is all about trying to be that wind beneath the wings for our children, our Black and brown children in underserved communities. We're focused on K through 8 specifically because we know that those are the formative years that make all of the difference. So our organization looks to stand in the gap for children. COVID certainly has taught us the importance of social emotional learning. So we have projects like Peace Corners, where, and I've joked, most workplaces need these peace corners, but places that we're building in schools and in camps and different spaces where children can have a timeout, where they can work on big emotions, where they can take a break when they need to take a break, where they can learn psychological safety. That's so important, and it's something that most of us weren't taught. The circumstances of COVID created a completely different environment for our children. So that social emotional learning lens is central to what we do. And my daughter was about kindness. I heard from people that she was the child that took kids off of the buddy bench when they didn't have anyone to play with, that she was the one that didn't let other children be bullied. And so the core and the spirit of our work is that mother's heart that wants to offer that safety for children so that they can have the tools they need to soar in life.
Now, if someone wanted to connect with Gabrielle's Wings, how do they go about that?
Yes, so GabriellesWings.org You can Google Gabrielle's Wings, but gabrielleswings.org. We have an Instagram page, we have a Facebook, and a LinkedIn page. I'm MD Horde, like medical doctor, although I'm not. I just like saying MD Horde.
Play one on TV.
I am on TV. At MD Horde is me on Instagram, and you can connect to Gabrielle's Wings that way as well. But we are proud to have been a part of funding almost $500,000 worth of projects in our short history on 3 different continents for children.
That is awesome. Can we just get some applause for that? Congratulations on that
Thank you.
achievement. Question?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and yeah, I'm really touched by everything. I have a question because it seems like, I was just looking through the table of contents, like, it seems like this process is very internal, like very self-focused. Like, you have to be, like, the way I think about it is the way people in my culture, Nigerians, say, face your front, like, focus on what you need to focus on and keep it pushing. But then there's also the alternative side of it where if you're facing your front and you're focused on what you need to do, sometimes the people around you feel like they are not being taken care of or being given enough energy or time or focus. And how do you deal with that aspect of knowing that you need to do the work to get yourself correct, but then people around you kind of need you to put up a certain type of face that you don't have the energy to keep up anymore because you want to move past a certain event or a certain type of scenario, circumstance?
No, that's a great question, and to just underline for some of us who perhaps didn't hear it, really the question is, how do you take care of yourself, and also if you have responsibilities outside of yourself, whether they're personal and professional, take care of those as well. I'll never forget on a flight with Gabrielle when she was just old enough to sort of get the video talking about the oxygen mask and why you have to put your oxygen mask on first, why mommy has to put her oxygen mask on first before she helps someone else. And I talk about that in the book as well. And the reality is, if we don't take care of ourselves, and no one else can create those rules for us, right? So creating safe and healthy boundaries, being able to be clear about when you need to say no, and being okay without having to owe anybody an explanation. I had to get comfortable as someone who wants to be all things to all people with inviting someone over and then sometimes calling and saying, I'm sorry, I'm not up to it. I plan to go somewhere, I'm sorry, I just can't do it today. And opening myself up to that vulnerability. And you know what's amazing about that is when you do that, sometimes you also give the person on the other end permission to take care of themselves too. So you can sometimes teach other people how to take care of themselves by how you take care of yourself.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for sharing your story. I just want to know, you mentioned meditation. What type of meditation did you do, and did it involve breath work and aromatherapy as well, or was just straight meditation?
I wish I told you I had a practice I did consistently. I don't. But what I have found is meditations around healing, around peace, meditations when I'm having difficulty sleeping at night. Sometimes it's something on the Calm app or even something online. But what's funny about the breath work, I did Lamaze classes and prenatal yoga before I had my daughter, and I have found that the breathing that you learn to do in order to give birth, there's something so primal about that is really useful even in meditation breathing exercises for me. So I think sometimes it can be just shutting the door, getting in a dark place for 5 seconds, and even when I do coaching now, and there are times when I am on a Zoom with a client and they come in 1,000 miles an hour and I say, okay, let's just take a minute to put our hand on our chest and shut our eyes. And in 30 seconds, you completely change the energy. So I would not say that I'm as dedicated a practitioner as I would like to be, but I absolutely appreciate and know the power of breathing and slowing down and getting in the moment. There are candles everywhere. You're welcome.
So it sounds like you had something completely dreadful happen, and you're dealing with it and going forward. Suppose somebody has not, in fact, had something terrible happen, but thinks that just in the normal course of things, something terrible is going to happen at some unspecified time, in some unspecified form going forward. Do you have any suggestions about how you can, so to speak, prepare, as well as, it sounds like your book is mostly focused on how do you deal with it afterwards. How do you deal with it before, and you don't know what it's going to be, but something dreadful might?
You know, I'm not a therapist. I won't pretend to be a therapist. What I can tell you that I believe with all my heart is that I'm grateful that I can't tell the future, because we spend so much energy fearful and imagining things, whether they have any root in reality or not, and sometimes they do, and then something completely different, perhaps wonderfully different or horrifically different, can happen at any time. For me, I'm choosing to live. I'm choosing to bet each day that today is worth living and to keep going. And I think part of the faith is that whatever I meet up the road, that hopefully I have the tools to survive it, that I have built the foundational family and faith and resilience tools that I can call upon to get through whatever that is. I hope that makes sense.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Any next question?
Hi, I've never been so happy that I made it here today.
Oh.
I've experienced a lot of grief in my life, and I've also lost friends, relationships. Can you tell us a little more about your experience there?
Well, you know, I think there are all sorts of losses, right? So, you know, certainly, like most of us, relationship losses, job losses. You know, thinking a career is on a certain path and somebody walks in with an envelope and slides it across the table. So I think the unexpected change of your life trajectory is just jarring, whether that's a sudden loss of a friend or a family member, or a sudden loss of a job or an opportunity. I think grief at its core, while it may be at different ranges, looks the same. And the ability to be honest with yourself about what you've lost, and to focus on what you still have is the most important thing. This may be gone, yet I still have this. I can still take this with me. Some things I need to leave behind, psychologically, physically, emotionally, literally, I have to leave behind. Yet there are some things, some people, some memories that I can bring forward with me.
Any other questions from the audience? We are down to last 3 or 4 minutes.
Thank you. I'm a Christian believer, but I still struggle with forgiveness. And I wanted you to talk about forgiveness because I'm sure there's guilt, self-guilt, as well as a tendency to blame others. And so what do you do about forgiveness?
You know, I think, thank you. My sorority sister was going to jump in for me, but I'm okay. Thank you. You know, any mother that loses a child, obviously what happened to my child was not my fault. I couldn't have seen it coming. I didn't know it. But I think all mothers unfairly have guilt about how, at all levels, if they're not able to protect their children the way they want to, from a school bully to what my child went through. When I think about forgiveness, I think about a couple of things. One, someone who seeks forgiveness And in my specific case, that person doesn't exist because the person that did this has never admitted they've done this. They're still fighting in court. And so I think about it in terms of someone seeking forgiveness, and I think about holding something inside of you that is painful and dangerous. And for me, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I pity the person that I knew who clearly the devil snatched. And so what I have chosen to focus on is where I can have reconciliation. So my ex-husband's mother, who's in her late 80s, who is my former mother-in-law, who was Gabrielle's only living grandmother, I take care of. She had one child who did this to her only grandchild. And I've had family and friends look at me like I was crazy. But for me, reconciliation was about holding on to what was true and not focusing on bitterness or hate or what ifs. And that for me has been healing. It is not about the person that perpetrated. That person is inconsequential in my life. It has been about holding on to love. And so that's how I've chosen to approach it.
Awesome answer. Well, I think we can wrap it up with a few more words from you. Since we are on the topic of forgiveness, can we talk about the twin baby cousin of forgiveness, which is grace? What role has grace played for you, and what takeaway would you give to this audience to move forward in grace?
I think grace is one of the most profound words in our language. Grace we can't earn, right? And I think, nor can others earn it from us. And I think learning how to be graceful towards people who are grieving, and also as someone who is grieving, showing grace to others who are perhaps fumbling horribly as they try to be helpful to you. You know, my brother and I both lost my mother, and yet we lost someone different, right? So we all grieve differently. We all operate in the world differently. Some people can't look at pictures. Some people have to have pictures everywhere. So I think grace for me is being clear about what you need and also giving grace to others, not when it infringes upon you or crosses boundaries for you, but giving grace to others who perhaps may not grieve or manage things the way that you do.
Michelle Hord, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This wonderful work, The Other Side of Yet. If you don't have it, get it. Please read it. It is an absolutely wonderful book and life guide. So thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much, and thank